The emergency alarm screamed through the streets of Colony Dawn at 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning. Mireille was preparing breakfast for her students when the first orbital strike turned the Eastern District into glass and fire. She watched through her kitchen window as buildings that had stood for 20 years simply vanished in columns of white light. The children in her school were already arriving for class. She had 43 students that morning. She would save only 11 of them. Captain Deho received the distress signal when his ship was 3 hours away at maximum speed. The message was short and desperate. Colony Dawn was under attack. Unknown, hostile forces, requesting immediate assistance. He pushed his engines past safety limits, knowing even as he did that he would arrive too late. The communication channels from the colony filled with screaming, then prayers, then silence. His crew worked in grim quiet as they raced toward a colony that was probably already dead. The Vraxian Dominion had been watching Colony Dawn for 6 months. Warlord Krathnox had identified the planet as strategically valuable and weakly defended. In his culture, this made it legitimate prey. He had 200 warships and 50,000 ground troops. The humans had 50,000 civilians and no military presence. The mathematics were simple. He gave the order to attack without bothering to issue a warning or declaration of war. In Vraxian thinking, the strong did not negotiate with the weak. They simply took what they wanted and paid the fine afterward. Mireille gathered her students in the basement as the bombardment continued overhead. The school's emergency shelter was rated for severe weather, not military weapons. The walls shook with each impact. Dust fell from the ceiling. The younger children cried. The older ones tried to comfort them, while their own hands trembled. Mireille checked her communication device obsessively, hoping for word that help was coming. Instead, she received an automated message from the colonial government. Evacuate immediately to designated shelter zones. The message was 12 minutes old. The designated shelter zones no longer existed. When the Vraxian ground forces arrived, they moved through the colony with methodical efficiency. Their orders were clear. Eliminate all human presence to establish territorial claim. No survivors meant no complications. Warlord Krathnox watched from orbit as his troops executed the mission. He felt neither guilt nor pleasure. This was simply how things worked. His species had expanded across 17 systems using these exact tactics. The Galactic Council always complained, his government always paid the standard fines, and life continued. Humans would be no different. Captain Deho arrived to find Colony Dawn burning. 47,000 people were dead or dying. His scanners detected Vraxian ships withdrawing toward the system's edge, their mission complete. He wanted to pursue them. He wanted to fire every weapon his ship carried. But 3,000 survivors were scattered across the planet's surface, hiding in basements and caves and anywhere the bombardment hadn't reached. His duty was to save who remained, not avenge who was lost. His crew worked for 18 hours straight, pulling survivors from the wreckage. Every person they saved had the same haunted look in their eyes. Mireille led her 11 surviving students through the ruins of her neighborhood. The Vraxian soldiers had moved through this area 3 hours earlier. Bodies lay in the streets. Some were her neighbors. Some were her friends. She made the children close their eyes as they walked, though she knew the sounds and smells would haunt them forever. When Captain Deho's rescue team found them, she was still functioning on pure determination. She gave them her students first. Only after the last child was safely aboard the shuttle did she allow herself to collapse. The Galactic Council convened within 24 hours of the attack. The emergency session brought together representatives from 200 species, each appearing via hologram in the Great Chamber on the neutral world of Concordia. Ambassador Jiwoo stood before them, her face composed but her eyes red from lack of sleep. She had been humanity's voice in the galaxy for 15 years. She had negotiated trade agreements and cultural exchanges. She had helped humanity integrate into this vast civilization. Now, she was here to report that 47,000 of her people had been murdered. The council mediator was a tall being named Kelthus, from a species that had been managing galactic disputes for 3,000 years. He listened to Ambassador Jiwoo's report with professional sympathy, then turned to the Vraxian representative. Warlord Krath Nox appeared via hologram, his armored form imposing even as a projection. He explained calmly that Colony Dawn had been established in territory that Vraxia had claimed 12 years prior. The humans had ignored the claim. He had acted to enforce his government's legitimate territorial rights. It was unfortunate that casualties occurred, but the humans should have evacuated when given the opportunity. Ambassador Jiwoo stared at him in disbelief. No warning had been given. No evacuation order had been issued. The attack had come without any communication at all. Warlord Krathnox's expression did not change. In his culture, the weak did not deserve warnings. Kelthus interrupted before the situation escalated further. He proposed the standard resolution. Vraxia would pay reparations of 10,000 credits per casualty. Both sides would sign a non-aggression treaty. The disputed territory would be divided by neutral arbitrators. This was how civilized species resolved their conflicts. The other council members nodded agreement. This was indeed the standard procedure. They had resolved hundreds of similar disputes using this exact formula. Some species murmured sympathy toward Ambassador Jiwoo, but no one objected to the proposal. Credits healed all wounds. Treaties prevented future conflicts. This was the galactic way. Ambassador Jiwoo looked around the chamber at all these alien faces, these representatives of ancient civilizations that had supposedly evolved beyond primitive violence. They were talking about the murder of 47,000 people like it was a minor bureaucratic inconvenience. Captain Daeho transmitted his recordings to the council chamber. The delegates watched in uncomfortable silence as the footage played. Schools burning. Hospitals bombed. Civilians running through streets as Vraxian soldiers hunted them. Children crying over the bodies of their parents. The footage lasted 14 minutes. When it ended, the chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then Kelthus cleared his throat and repeated his proposal. Reparations and a treaty. This was still the appropriate response. Some conflicts were tragic, but the protocols existed for good reason. They prevented cycles of revenge that could destabilize entire sectors. Ambassador Jiwoo felt something break inside her chest. These beings, these supposedly advanced civilizations, they had become so accustomed to horror that they had bureaucratized it. Murder was just another item on an agenda, resolved with credits and signatures. She opened her mouth to argue, to plead, to make them understand that some crimes could not be resolved with money. Then her communication device vibrated with an encrypted message from Earth. She read it once, then twice, then looked up at the assembled council, with an expression that made several of them shift uncomfortably. The message was simple. Do not agree to anything. Do not negotiate. Do not accept their blood money. Humanity is coming, and we are bringing justice with us. The War Council met in Geneva 30 hours after Colony Dawn fell silent. Every nation's military leadership appeared via secure hologram, their faces grim and their patience exhausted. Prime Minister Soo-young sat at the head of the table, flanked by High Commander Hyun-sik and General Young-jae. They had all watched the footage from Colony Dawn. They had all read the survivor testimonies. They had all seen the Galactic Council's proposed resolution. And every single one of them wanted blood. Dr. Unji presented her analysis of the galactic situation with clinical precision. She had spent 20 years studying alien psychology and culture. Her conclusions were disturbing. The galaxy had not seen a war of annihilation in over 4,000 years. Conflicts were fought over resources and territory, and they ended with negotiations and payments. The concept of fighting for moral principles was considered primitive. The idea of refusing to negotiate was viewed as irrational. No species in the current galactic order understood the human concept of justice requiring consequences rather than compensation. Minho sat in the observation gallery, his hands clenched into fists. His sister Mireille had survived Colony Dawn, but barely. He had spoken to her via video link 3 hours ago. She had not cried. She had not screamed. She had simply stared at the camera, with empty eyes, and told him what she had witnessed. The Vraxian soldiers, laughing as they hunted children through the ruins. The orbital bombardment continuing even after the colony defenses were destroyed. The systematic execution of medical staff trying to treat the wounded. Minho was a combat pilot with 12 years of experience. He had never truly hated anyone before this moment. High Commander Hyunsik stood and activated the primary display. It showed a tactical map of Vraxian space, their fleet positions, their industrial centers, their government facilities. He had been preparing this presentation since the first distress call from Colony Dawn. His voice was calm as he spoke, but everyone in the room could hear the steel beneath it. Humanity had a choice to make. They could accept the credits, sign the treaty, and teach every predator species in the galaxy that human lives could be purchased cheaply. Or they could demonstrate that some crimes carried consequences that could not be negotiated away. Prime Minister Su Young listened to the debate that followed. The diplomatic advisors warned of isolation from galactic society. The economic ministers worried about trade disruptions. The political strategists calculated election impacts. She let them speak for 20 minutes before she raised her hand for silence. Her own daughter was 10 years old. She attended a school much like the one Mireille had taught in. The thought of that school being bombed, of her daughter running through burning streets while alien soldiers hunted her, made every political calculation irrelevant. Some things mattered more than politics. Ambassador Jiwoo stood before the Galactic Council 12 hours later with new instructions from Earth. Her voice was steady as she spoke, though her words fell into the chamber like bombs. Humanity rejected the proposed reparations. Humanity rejected the mediation process. Humanity withdrew from all negotiations regarding Colony Dawn. The Vraxian Dominion had committed an act of mass murder against innocent civilians. Humanity's response would be delivered through military channels, not diplomatic ones. The Council could consider this statement a formal declaration of war. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Kelthus attempted to restore order, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that he likely meant as helpful. Ambassador Jiwoo needed to understand that this was not how civilized species behaved. War was inefficient and destructive. The galaxy had evolved beyond such primitive responses. Surely humanity did not want to be seen as barbaric by the greater galactic community. Surely they understood that revenge accomplished nothing. Ambassador Jiwoo let him finish, then delivered the statement that would be quoted across the galaxy for generations. Humanity had one absolute principle regarding those who murdered civilians. They did not negotiate. They did not accept payment. They did not sign treaties. They eliminated the threat completely so it could never harm innocents again. This was not revenge. This was justice. And if the galaxy considered justice to be barbaric, then humanity would wear that label proudly while they did what needed to be done. The Vraxian Dominion would learn what it meant to provoke a species that valued its children above galactic approval. The Vraxian representative responded with barely concealed contempt. Humanity had 300 warships. Vraxia commanded 2,000. Humanity had been in space for barely a century. Vraxia had been conquering systems for 6,000 years. If the humans wanted war, they would learn a painful lesson about their place in the galactic order. Warlord Krathnox appeared personally via hologram to issue an ultimatum. Accept the reparations within 48 hours, or face total war. He seemed genuinely amused by humanity's defiance, like an adult watching a toddler throw a tantrum. General Youngjae received the ultimatum while overseeing the mobilization of Earth's entire military force. Every ship was being prepared for deployment. Every soldier was being briefed. Every covert operative embedded in alien space was being activated. He read Warlord Krathnox's message, smiled grimly, and deleted it. Ultimatums assumed the other side still wanted to negotiate. Humanity was past that point. The only message that mattered now would be delivered in fire and steel. Dr. Yunji briefed the combat commanders on Vraxian psychology. They were a warrior culture that valued strength and despised weakness. They expected enemies to surrender when facing superior numbers. They had never encountered a species that became more dangerous when cornered. She warned them that the Vraxians would not understand humanity's mindset until it was far too late. They thought humans were posturing. They could not comprehend that humanity meant every single word. By the time they realized their mistake, their fleet would already be burning. Minho volunteered for the most dangerous assignment available: deep strike operations behind enemy lines, targeting command and control infrastructure. The survival rate was estimated at 40%. He did not care. The mission briefing explained that these strikes would be critical to disrupting Vraxian coordination. They needed pilots willing to take extreme risks for marginal advantages. Every pilot in the room raised their hand. The briefing officer had to turn away dozens of volunteers. Humanity was not short on people willing to die to protect others from suffering Colony Dawn's fate. Captain Deho prepared his ship for deployment as the flagship of the First Retribution Fleet. His crew worked with focused intensity, checking every system twice. The youngest crew member was 19 years old, a technician named Jiwan, who had lost his entire extended family at Colony Dawn. The oldest was 63. An engineer named Boram, who had come out of retirement specifically to serve on this mission. They represented what humanity was bringing to this war. Not superior technology, not greater numbers. Simply the absolute conviction that some evils must be stopped regardless of the cost. High Commander Hyunsik recorded his response to the Vraxian ultimatum. It would be broadcast on every galactic channel simultaneously. His message was short. The Vraxian Dominion murdered 47,000 innocent civilians without warning or mercy. They showed humanity's children no compassion. Humanity would show their government no quarter. This was not a negotiation. This was not a territorial dispute. This was extinction-level retaliation against those responsible. The Vraxians had taken everything from Colony Dawn. Now humanity was coming to take everything from them. Prime Minister Su-young addressed the people of Earth in a historic broadcast. She explained that humanity was going to war not for conquest or glory, but to establish a principle that would protect every human everywhere in the galaxy. When someone murdered human civilians, they would face consequences so severe that no one would ever make that choice again. The cost would be high. Lives would be lost. But the alternative was teaching the galaxy that humans were easy prey. She asked for the support of every nation, every citizen, every person who believed that children should be able to go to school without fear of being bombed from orbit. The galaxy watched humanity's preparations with a mixture of confusion and concern. Most species expected the humans to lose quickly, and then finally accept the standard resolution. Some worried that humanity would cause unnecessary casualties before reality forced them to negotiate. A few, particularly the younger and weaker species who had suffered under larger empires, watched with cautious hope. Maybe these humans would actually do what they claimed. Maybe someone would finally draw a line that predators could not cross with simple payment. Ambassador Jiwoo remained at the Galactic Council as humanity's fleets departed Earth. The other delegates approached her privately, offering sympathy and advice. They urged compromise. They warned of consequences. They genuinely seemed to believe they were helping. She thanked them politely and returned to her quarters, where she watched the fleet departure on her personal display. She had been a diplomat for 2 decades. She had believed in negotiation and compromise. Colony Dawn had taught her that some people only understood one language. Humanity was about to speak it fluently. The First Retribution Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, not at the Vraxian border as expected, but deep within their core territory. Captain Deho had studied every tactical manual humanity had ever written, and one lesson appeared consistently across 5,000 years of warfare. When fighting a larger force, strike where they are weakest, and make them afraid. The Vraxian homeworld system had not seen combat in 2,000 years. They kept minimal defenses in place, confident that any enemy would be stopped at their borders. They were wrong. Warlord Krathnox received the alert while reviewing reports of human fleet movements near the border systems. According to intelligence, humanity's ships were preparing for a conventional assault on Vraxian defensive positions. The numbers favored Vraxia heavily. He was planning his victory speech when his tactical officer informed him that 150 human warships had just appeared in orbit around Vraxia Prime. For the first time in his long military career, Krathnox felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Captain Deho broadcast on all Vraxian channels before opening fire. His message was simple. Every military installation, every government facility, and every ship that had participated in the Colony Dawn massacre was now a target. Civilian areas would be avoided. Hospitals would be spared. Schools would not be touched. Humanity would demonstrate the mercy that Vraxia had denied to Colony Dawn's children. But every person responsible for that atrocity would face justice. The broadcast ended. The bombardment began. Minho led his squadron through Vraxian air defenses with the precision of someone who no longer cared whether he survived the day. His mission was to destroy the command bunker where Warlord Krathnox directed military operations. The bunker was buried 200 meters underground, protected by shields and point defense weapons. Standard tactics said it was impregnable. Minho did not care about standard tactics. He flew his fighter directly into the shield perimeter, launching his full payload at point-blank range before ejecting at the last possible second. The bunker survived. Barely. The next 11 fighters in his squadron finished the job. The galaxy watched in real time as humanity waged war in a way they had never witnessed. Galactic conflicts were typically methodical affairs fought over months or years, with careful attention to minimizing costs and casualties. Human ships fought with terrifying intensity, pressing attacks even when damaged, ramming enemy vessels when weapons failed, pilots sacrificing themselves to ensure mission success. Within 6 hours of the initial assault, Vraxia's orbital defenses were crippled, and their command structure was in chaos. General Youngjae coordinated covert operations from the UNS Washington, positioned just outside the combat zone. His operatives had spent the past 3 weeks infiltrating Vraxian space, establishing themselves in key positions. When the military assault began, they activated simultaneously. Communications networks crashed. Supply depots exploded. Transportation hubs ground to a halt. The Vraxian military discovered that their logistical infrastructure, untested in actual combat for centuries, was far more vulnerable than they had believed. Lieutenant Jiho led a boarding team onto a Vraxian battlecruiser that had survived the initial bombardment. The Vraxians were larger and stronger than humans, with natural armor that made them difficult to kill, but they had never fought an enemy in close-quarters combat aboard a damaged ship. Jiho's team moved through the corridors with brutal efficiency, using the cramped spaces and zero-gravity sections to negate the Vraxians' physical advantages. The battlecruiser's crew surrendered after 40 minutes of fighting. Jiho accepted their surrender and immediately moved to the next target. Admiral Nari arrived with the 2nd Retribution Fleet 3 days into the operation. She brought another 100 warships and a strategy that made the Vraxian High Command realize they were facing something beyond their experience. Instead of concentrating her forces, she split them into small units that struck military targets across 15 different systems simultaneously. The Vraxians had to choose between defending their homeworld or protecting their colonies. Every choice left something vulnerable. Every decision meant another defeat. Journalist Sionmi broadcast from the UNS Righteous Thunder, providing real-time coverage that every species in the galaxy watched with horrified fascination. She showed human pilots flying suicide missions to destroy weapons platforms. She showed Marines pulling wounded Vraxian civilians from damaged buildings before moving on to their next objective. She showed Captain Deho personally overseeing the delivery of medical supplies to a Vraxian hospital that had been caught near a military target. Humanity was demonstrating that they could be both merciless and merciful, and they chose which face to show based on whether you had harmed their innocence. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session as the war entered its 2nd week. The Vraxian representative, No longer warlord Krathnox, who was missing and presumed dead, pleaded for intervention. Humanity was violating every convention of civilized warfare. They were refusing to negotiate. They were pursuing total military victory. This was barbaric and unacceptable. Ambassador Jiwoo listened to the speech, then stood to respond. Her voice was cold enough to freeze atmospheres. Humanity had studied galactic history thoroughly before joining the Council. In the past 500 years alone, there had been 300 conflicts similar to Colony Dawn, larger species attacking smaller ones, killing civilians, then paying fines and continuing their expansion. The galaxy called this civilized. Humanity called it predatory. The Vraxian representative wanted to discuss conventions and protocols. Ambassador Jiwoo wanted to discuss the 47,000 people who died screaming while the galaxy prepared paperwork. The council chamber fell silent. Captain Daeho received new orders as the third week of combat began. High Commander Hyunsik was coming to Vraxian space personally with the 3rd Retribution Fleet. The message was clear. Humanity was not seeking a negotiated peace. They were demanding unconditional surrender. Daeho gathered his senior officers and explained what was about to happen. The Vraxians would be given one final chance to accept terms. If they refused, the bombardment would intensify. Several officers looked uncomfortable. Daeho understood. Humanity was becoming something they had never been before. But Colony Dawn's children deserved justice, and justice had a price. The Vraxian government attempted to sue for peace on the 18th day of the war. They offered massive reparations, territorial concessions, and trade agreements. They offered to pay 10 times the standard compensation. They offered to establish memorials for Colony Dawn. They offered everything except the one thing humanity demanded: the complete dismantling of their military and war crimes, trials for every officer involved in the massacre. High Commander Hyunsik rejected their offer within 30 seconds of receiving it. Minho was back in space after recovering from his ejection injuries. His new squadron was half the size of his original one. Some pilots were dead. Some were too wounded to continue, but replacements kept arriving from Earth. Volunteers who wanted to be part of this mission. He led them on precision strikes against Vraxian industrial facilities that produced military equipment. Every factory destroyed meant fewer weapons that could threaten human colonies in the future. The missions were dangerous and exhausting. No one complained. This was what justice required. The smaller species in the galaxy began sending quiet messages of support to humanity. A herbivore species, called the Veltar, had lost colonies to Vraxian aggression 20 years earlier. They had accepted the standard reparations and signed the required treaties. The raids had continued. Now they watched as humanity demonstrated that military force could accomplish what diplomatic protocols never would. Their representative sent a private message to Ambassador Jiwoo. Perhaps the humans understood something the galaxy had forgotten. Some threats needed to be removed, not negotiated with. Admiral Nari's forces secured orbit over 3 major Vraxian colonies by the war's 4th week. Her terms were simple: surrender all military personnel involved in Colony Dawn, dismantle all planetary defenses, accept human inspection teams, or watch as their orbital infrastructure was systematically destroyed. 2 colonies surrendered immediately. The third attempted resistance. Nari gave the civilians 6 hours to evacuate before the bombardment began. They did not target hospitals or schools or residential areas. But every military installation was reduced to rubble. The colony surrendered before the deadline expired. High Commander Hyunsik arrived in Vraxian space with 150 additional warships and a transport carrying military judges, prosecutors, and detention specialists. The message was clear. Humanity had come not just to win a war but to ensure justice was served. The Vraxian High Council, what remained of it after the command bunker strikes, received his terms: unconditional surrender, complete military disarmament, war crimes trials for every officer involved in planning or executing the Colony Dawn massacre, 50 years of human monitoring and oversight. These were not negotiable. The galaxy watched as the Vraxian government collapsed under the weight of defeat and internal chaos. Species that had feared Vraxian expansion for centuries suddenly found themselves safe. Species that had paid reparations for Vraxian attacks realized those credits had accomplished nothing. Humanity had needed only 4 weeks to demonstrate what 10,000 years of diplomatic tradition had failed to achieve. Some wrongs could not be resolved through negotiation. Some crimes required absolute justice. And some species, it turned out, were willing to pay any price to ensure their children remained safe. The tribunal station hung in orbit over Vraxia Prime like a monument to humanity's determination. It was not a warship, but a converted cargo vessel that had been transformed into a courtroom large enough to hold 200 observers. Every species in the galaxy had been invited to send representatives. Most accepted. They wanted to witness what humanity called justice. Judge Tae-hyung presided over proceedings that had no precedent in 10,000 years of galactic history. War crimes, trials, were a human concept. The galaxy was about to learn what they meant. Warlord Krathnox sat in the defendant's chair, his massive frame restrained by devices that could handle his species' strength. He had been captured during the battle for the command bunker, pulled from the wreckage by Lieutenant Jiho's team. 46 other Vraxian officers sat in similar restraints, each one identified as having played a direct role in planning or executing the Colony Dawn massacre. The gallery held survivors, journalists, and diplomatic observers. Mireille sat in the front row, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her eyes never leaving Krathnox's face. Counsel Ji-yun stood to present the defense case. She was human, assigned by the tribunal to ensure the proceedings met humanity's standards of fairness. The galaxy found this strange. Why would humans provide legal representation to those who murdered their people? Ji-yun explained patiently that justice required giving the accused every opportunity to defend themselves. Only then would the verdict have true meaning. She argued that Krathnox had acted according to his culture's values and galactic norms. Territorial disputes were resolved through force. This was accepted practice for thousands of years. The prosecution responded by calling Dr. Yoonji to the stand. She explained human ethics and law in simple terms. Humanity recognized that different species had different values, but some principles transcended culture. The deliberate killing of civilians, especially children, was considered among the worst crimes in human civilization. The fact that the galaxy had normalized such actions did not make them acceptable. It made the entire galactic order complicit in atrocities. She presented evidence that 94% of Colony Dawn's casualties were non-combatants. This was not warfare. This was mass murder. Mireille took the stand on the third day of the trial. She described the morning of the attack in precise detail. The orbital strikes that came without warning. The children she tried to protect. The Vraxian soldiers who hunted survivors through the ruins with what she could only describe as entertainment. She identified Warlord Krathnox as the officer who had broadcast from orbit, declaring Colony Dawn to be Vraxian territory by right of conquest. Her voice never wavered. Her testimony lasted 4 hours. The gallery sat in absolute silence. Journalist Seon-mi presented video evidence from 17 different sources. Orbital bombardment, continuing after military targets were destroyed. Ground forces, executing wounded civilians. Command communications showing deliberate targeting of schools and hospitals to maximize casualties and force rapid surrender. The footage lasted 6 hours. Several alien observers left the gallery, unable to continue watching. Judge Tae-hyung ordered regular breaks to allow everyone to process what they were seeing. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Captain Daeho testified about arriving too late to save the colony. His voice remained professional, as he described pulling survivors from wreckage, finding bodies in shelters that had been deliberately targeted, and watching a 10-year-old girl die from injuries while asking for her mother who was already dead. Several alien observers wept openly. Their species lacked human tear ducts, but the emotional response was universal. One representative, a being named Veltaris from a herbivore species, stood and bowed deeply toward Captain Deho before leaving the gallery. The gesture needed no translation. The defense argued that Warlord Krathnox was following orders from his government and acting according to established military doctrine. Counsel Ji-yun pointed out that every galactic conflict in recent memory had involved similar civilian casualties, and none had resulted in criminal prosecution. The prosecution countered that previous crimes going unpunished did not make new crimes acceptable. Humanity was establishing a new standard. From this day forward, the galaxy would know that some actions carried consequences that could not be negotiated away. General Youngjae testified about the covert intelligence gathered before the attack. The evidence showed that Warlord Krathnox had been specifically warned by his own advisors that Colony Dawn was a civilian settlement with no military value. He had proceeded anyway because, in his assessment, killing 50,000 humans would demonstrate Vraxian strength and discourage future human expansion. The attack was not a military necessity. It was terrorism designed to accomplish political goals through fear. Under human law, this was the definition of a war crime. The Galactic Council convened simultaneously with the trial, debating humanity's actions. Some species argued that the humans were dangerous zealots who would destabilize the entire galactic order. Others pointed out that the galactic order had permitted 300 massacres similar to Colony Dawn in recent centuries. Perhaps the order needed destabilizing. Ambassador Jiwoo addressed the council during their session. She explained that humanity was not trying to impose their values on the galaxy. They were simply establishing one inviolable principle: attack human civilians and face total retribution. Other species were free to continue their own diplomatic traditions. Prime Minister Su-young delivered a speech that was broadcast across every major species communication network. She stood before the cameras with the confidence of someone who no longer cared about diplomatic niceties. For 10,000 years, the galaxy had normalized atrocities by calling them territorial disputes and resolving them with financial compensation. Humanity rejected this system entirely. Evil that went unpunished grew bolder. History had taught humanity this lesson through centuries of blood. Today, humanity offered the galaxy a choice: join them in drawing an absolute line against civilian massacres, or watch as humanity drew that line alone. The verdict came on the 18th day of the tribunal. Judge Taehyung reviewed the evidence and the arguments from both sides. He acknowledged that Warlord Krathnox had indeed acted according to his culture's values and the galaxy's accepted practices. Then, he explained why that changed nothing. The deliberate targeting of 47,000 civilians, including 12,000 children, constituted crimes against sapient life. The evidence showed premeditation, systematic execution, and complete disregard for mercy or basic morality. Warlord Krathnox was found guilty on all charges. 43 other officers received similar verdicts. The sentences varied based on individual culpability. Warlord Krathnox received life imprisonment without possibility of release. His second-in-command received 200 years. Officers who had carried out orders but shown some restraint received lighter sentences ranging from 50 to 100 years. All were required to pay personal reparations to Colony Dawn survivors from seized assets. The Vraxian government was placed under a human-led monitoring system for 50 years. Any future aggressive actions would result in immediate military intervention. The galaxy watched as humanity established accountability where none had existed before. 3 small species announced their support for the verdict within hours of its reading. They had all suffered attacks from larger species and received only token compensation. The Veltar representative gave a speech explaining that for 300 years, the Krothven had raided their colonies, taking citizens as slaves and resources as tribute. They had paid credits. The raids had continued. Perhaps humanity's approach would prove more effective. Several other species sent private messages to Ambassador Jiwoo, expressing similar sentiments. The galaxy was beginning to understand that justice required more than financial transactions. Larger predatory species expressed outrage at the precedent being set. The Krothven ambassador declared that humanity was interfering with natural galactic order, where stronger species dominated weaker ones. Ambassador Jiwoo's response was broadcast on all channels. Humanity rejected the concept of natural order that permitted the strong to prey on the weak. Earth's history showed where that philosophy led. She suggested that predatory species might want to reconsider their strategies, because humanity was now actively patrolling space and would respond to any massacre of civilians, regardless of which species was targeted. Mireille stood outside the tribunal station after the verdict was read. Journalists from 40 species wanted interviews. She gave one statement that would be quoted across the galaxy. Justice could not bring back her students or heal the scars left by Colony Dawn. But seeing those responsible held accountable meant their deaths had not been meaningless. Other colonies, human and alien alike, were now safer because predatory species had learned there were consequences for atrocities. If that was all Colony Dawn's sacrifice accomplished, it was enough. Captain Daeho prepared to return his fleet to human space now that the immediate crisis had ended. But Ambassador Jiwoo sent him new orders. The fleet was to remain in this sector for the next year, conducting patrols and responding to threats against civilian populations of any species. Humanity was establishing the first permanent peacekeeping force in galactic history. Volunteers from 18 other species asked to join. Daeho accepted them all. The Shield Fleet was born. The galaxy would never be the same. For 10,000 years, predatory species had expanded through violence, secure in the knowledge that they could simply pay fines afterward. In 4 weeks and 1 trial, humanity had shattered that assumption. The message was clear and absolute. Attack civilians and face extinction-level retaliation. No negotiation. No compromise. Only justice delivered with overwhelming force. Some species called it barbaric. Others called it long overdue. But everyone understood it. 6 months had passed since the verdict at the Vraxian tribunal when the Nethril made contact. They were a reclusive species that observed galactic events but rarely participated. Their message to Ambassador Jiwoo was brief and disturbing. In 8 weeks, the Krothven horde would begin a genocidal campaign against the Lethrian homeworld. Billions would die. The Galactic Council would send mediators as always. The question was whether humanity would send fleets. Jiwoo forwarded the message to Earth, with a single word attached. Verify. General Youngjae's intelligence network confirmed the Nethril warning within 3 days. The Krothven were massing forces near Lethrian space. Communications intercepts revealed their intentions were exactly as predicted. The Lethrians were a peaceful aquatic species that had never developed military technology. They had no defenses and no allies. The Krothven viewed them as prey animals, fit only for consumption and slavery. Standard galactic protocol would be negotiation after the invasion began. Humanity had a different protocol now. Prime Minister Su Young called an emergency cabinet meeting. The question before them was simple, but profound. Colony Dawn had been a human tragedy that demanded human response, but the Lethrians were aliens with no connection to Earth. Did humanity have the right or responsibility to intervene in conflicts that did not directly involve them? High Commander Hyunsik pointed out that they had already answered this question. When humanity established the Shield Fleet and declared their opposition to civilian massacres regardless of species, they had committed themselves to a new role in the galaxy. Admiral Nari received deployment orders while her fleet was conducting training exercises near the Vraxian border. She was to take 120 warships to Lethrian space immediately and establish defensive positions. Do not wait for council approval. Do not request permission. Simply be there when the Krothven arrived and make clear that their invasion would not proceed unopposed. Her officers asked if they were authorized to open fire on Krothven forces. Her response was simple. If they attack civilians, eliminate them. Humanity did not negotiate with those who committed atrocities. The Krothven horde emerged into Lethrian space to find human warships waiting for them. Their invasion force numbered 500 vessels, confident that the peaceful Lethrians would surrender immediately. Instead, they faced Admiral Nari broadcasting on all frequencies. The Lethrian homeworld was under human protection. Any attack on civilian targets would be met with total military force. The Krothven commander responded with contempt. Humanity had no authority in this sector. They should leave before they were destroyed. Admiral Nari's fleet powered up weapons and held position. The message was clear. Try us. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the second time in 6 months to address humanity's actions. The Krothven ambassador demanded humanity withdraw from Lethrian space. This was an internal matter between two species. Human interference violated galactic sovereignty principles. Ambassador Jiwoo listened patiently, then asked a simple question. How many Lethrian civilians needed to die before the Council would consider intervention? The Krothven ambassador had no answer. The Council mediator suggested that perhaps 1 million casualties would warrant formal mediation. Jiwoo stood and walked out of the chamber. Minho led the first strike when the Krothven commander ordered his forces to proceed with the invasion despite human presence. 3 Krothven cruisers broke formation and descended toward the Lethrian homeworld. Minho's squadron intercepted them at the edge of the atmosphere. The battle was brief and brutal. 2 Krothven ships were destroyed. The third retreated with critical damage. Minho broadcast his combat footage on all galactic channels. Humanity had drawn a line. The Krothven had crossed it. Now everyone would see what happened next. The Krothven horde attacked in force, apparently believing that human resolve would break when facing overwhelming numbers. They were wrong. Admiral Nari had studied every engagement in human military history. She knew how to fight a defensive battle against superior numbers. Her ships formed layered defensive positions, each covering the others. When Krothven vessels pressed attacks, they walked into overlapping fields of fire. The battle lasted 14 hours. Humanity lost 8 ships. The Krothven lost 93. The invasion was repelled. Captain Deho arrived with reinforcements from the Shield Fleet 3 days into the crisis. His ships brought not just additional firepower, but humanitarian supplies for the Lethrian population. Human medical teams set up clinics on the surface to treat injuries from Krothven bombardment that had landed before Admiral Nari established full orbital control. Lieutenant Jiho personally led rescue operations in damaged underwater cities. The Lethrians watched in amazement as these strange bipedal aliens risked their lives to save people they had never met before this moment. The Krothven regrouped and attacked again, this time with their full force. They had called in reinforcements from neighboring sectors, assembling nearly 800 warships. The mathematics seemed inevitable. Humanity had 150 ships in theater. Even with superior tactics, the numbers were overwhelmingly against them. General Youngjae sent a message to Admiral Nari before the battle began. Hold as long as possible. Earth was sending everything they had. In the meantime, make the Krothven pay for every meter of space. The Second Battle of Lethria lasted 5 days and became legendary in galactic military history. Human ships fought with the same desperate courage they had shown at Colony Dawn. Damaged vessels continued fighting until their life support failed. Pilots ejected from destroyed fighters and used personal weapons against enemy ships. Minho led a boarding action against a Krothven command ship, capturing their battle plans and disrupting their coordination. Admiral Nari demonstrated tactical brilliance that alien military academies would study for centuries. But the human advantage came down to one simple fact. They refused to quit. Judge Taehyung broadcast from the Shield Fleet flagship during the battle. His message was directed not at the Krothven, but at the entire galaxy. Humanity was fighting and dying to protect a species they barely knew. They received no payment for this service. They gained no territory from this conflict. They simply believed that civilian lives mattered more than galactic protocols. Any species that shared this belief was welcome to join humanity. Any species that opposed it should remember what happened to Vraxia. The galaxy was changing, and everyone needed to choose which side of that change they wanted to be on. The first alien reinforcements arrived on the 6th day of battle. Veltaris led a fleet of 30 ships from his species, small vessels that were outdated by galactic standards, but they held the line alongside human warships while Admiral Nari's fleet recovered from the brutal fighting. More species arrived over the following days. Some sent military forces, others sent medical ships and supplies. Within 2 weeks, 43 species had contributed to the defense of Lethria. The coalition was small and disorganized, but it existed, and that changed everything. High Commander Hyunsik arrived with Earth's main battle fleet, nearly 400 warships that had been rushed through accelerated construction programs. His appearance forced the Krothven to face reality. They could not win this war. But more importantly, they could not win any war if this coalition held together. The predatory species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia suddenly faced unified opposition. Hyunsik broadcast terms: complete withdrawal from Lethrian space, war crimes trials for commanders who targeted civilians, 50-year moratorium on aggressive expansion. The alternative was total military defeat. The Krothven sued for peace. They accepted human terms with bitter resentment, but clear understanding. Humanity had demonstrated that they possessed both the capability and the will to enforce their principles across the galaxy. The trial that followed was shorter than the Vraxian proceedings, but equally thorough. Krothven officers who had ordered attacks on civilian targets received significant prison sentences. The Krothven government was placed under the same monitoring system that had been established for Vraxia. Predatory expansion was no longer a viable strategy. Mireille traveled to Lethria after the fighting ended. The Lethrians wanted to meet the teacher who had survived the massacre that changed everything. She walked through their underwater cities, seeing civilians who were alive because humanity had decided their lives mattered. Young Lethrians surrounded her, asking questions about Earth and humans and why they had helped. Mireille gave the same answer to everyone. Because watching innocent people suffer and doing nothing made you complicit in their suffering. Humanity had learned this lesson the hard way. They would not forget it. The Galactic Council underwent dramatic restructuring over the following months. Ambassador Jiwoo proposed new charter amendments that recognized crimes against sapient life as requiring intervention rather than just mediation. The resistance from predatory species was fierce. But 43 species had already demonstrated their willingness to fight for this principle. The mathematics of galactic politics had shifted. The amendments passed. For the first time in 10,000 years, there were consequences for massacring civilians that went beyond financial penalties. Prime Minister Suyong stood before the United Earth government to deliver her assessment of the changes humanity had brought to the galaxy. The cost had been high. 12,000 human soldiers had died, defending principles, most of the galaxy considered irrelevant. 30 ships had been destroyed. Earth's economy had been strained by years of military mobilization, but 8 billion Lethrian lives had been saved. Dozens of potential conflicts had been prevented by the new enforcement regime. The galaxy was becoming safer, and humanity had proven that justice was possible even in space. The Shield Fleet became a permanent institution, staffed by personnel from 60 different species. Captain Deho retired from active command to lead the training program that taught alien crews how to operate alongside humans. Minho became an instructor, passing on tactics that had kept him alive through 2 major conflicts. Admiral Nari took command of the Shield Fleet's operations, coordinating rapid response forces that could reach any sector within a week. General Youngjae established the intelligence network that would identify threats before they became crises. Dr. Unji wrote the comprehensive guide to human ethics that became required reading for all species joining the new enforcement system. It explained humanity's core principle in simple terms. Every sapient life had inherent value that could not be negotiated away. Stronger species did not have the right to prey on weaker ones. Justice required consequences, not just compensation. The book was controversial, especially among traditional powers. But species who had lived under the threat of predation embraced it eagerly. A new philosophy was spreading through the galaxy. Journalist Sionmi produced a documentary about the transformation of galactic civilization over 2 years. She interviewed survivors from Colony Dawn and Lethria. She showed footage of the battles and the trials. She explained how humanity's refusal to accept the old order had created space for a new one. The documentary ended with children from 20 different species playing together in a park on a colony world that had been terrorized by raiders until the Shield Fleet established a permanent presence. The children did not know they were living in a revolution. They simply knew they were safe. Ambassador Jiwoo was elected Secretary General of the reformed Galactic Council. Her first act was to establish the Justice Commission that would investigate crimes against civilians and coordinate intervention forces. Humanity provided the largest contingent of ships and personnel, but they were no longer alone. The galaxy had learned what humanity had tried to teach them. Some principles were worth fighting for. Some lines could not be crossed without consequences. And sometimes, the only way to stop monsters was to be more determined than they were. Colony Dawn was rebuilt as a memorial world. Humans and aliens from across the galaxy came to see where everything changed. The names of 47,000 victims were carved into walls that surrounded gardens and parks. Mireille returned there on the 5-year anniversary of the massacre. She stood before the memorial and thought about her students who had died. They would never see what their deaths had created. But billions of beings across the galaxy were alive because humanity had refused to let their murders be reduced to a line item in a diplomatic agreement. The galaxy had warned humanity about their emotional nature and primitive sense of honor. They had been absolutely correct. Humanity was emotional. They did value honor over pragmatism. They did fight wars over principles rather than resources. And for the first time in galactic history, that made all the difference. The predators learned to fear. The prey learned to hope. And civilization discovered that justice was not a primitive concept, but a revolutionary one. Humanity had come to the stars carrying one simple message. They did not negotiate with those who murdered innocents. They eliminated the threat so it could never harm anyone again. The galaxy had laughed at their arrogance. Then they had watched humanity back up every word with blood and steel. Now the galaxy operated under new rules. Rules that said some actions carried consequences that could not be bought off with credits or smoothed over with treaties. The Shield Fleet patrolled the space lanes, a visible reminder that the strong could no longer prey on the weak with impunity. Captain Daho's ship had become a symbol, known to every species. When it arrived in a system, predators reconsidered their plans and victims found hope. Humanity had changed the galaxy, not through diplomacy or trade, but through the simple act of drawing a line and refusing to move. Evil unchecked grows bolder. Justice demands action. And some principles are worth any price. The stars belong to everyone now. Not just to those with the largest fleets. Children across the galaxy went to school without fearing orbital bombardment. Colonies expanded without terror of genocide. The transformation was incomplete and imperfect. There were still conflicts and crimes. But for the first time in recorded galactic history, the victims had defenders who would come regardless of payment or politics, all because humanity had learned one lesson from their own bloody history and refused to forget it. They did not negotiate with murderers. They delivered justice. And the galaxy would never be the same.